Hello and welcome to another episode of the Red Tinted Glasses podcast this week. It's the second episode of the week, and I'm delighted for the opposition insight into Thursday night's opponent, Shakhtar Donetsk, to be joined by Andrew Todos, who is a Ukrainian football social media influencer, do you want to be called, Andrew?
Yeah,
Who you'll also know from the site Zoria Londonsk. Andrew, welcome to the show.
thanks for having me on, Glenn. Looking forward to chatting.
Very much looking forward to chatting as well, and delighted that you've made the effort as well, joining us from Chisinau Airport. I think that's the first time we'll have somebody based in a Moldovan airport on the podcast. So Aberdeen on Thursday face Ukrainian opposition for the first time since we played Dnipro and beat them. I think Thursday night is definitely going to be a tougher task when they face Shakhtar, isn't it?
Yeah, most likely. Albeit, I think back then that was also similarly a bit of a shock because Dnipro weren't half bad, but you guys got a great result. This time round, let's say if you were ever to beat Shakhtar, it might be the best time because Ukrainian football isn't where it used to be due to the war and everything like that. And they're playing in the Conference League for the very first time. Albeit, I get that both the sides that we're talking about today are in kind of opposite sides of the table in their domestic division. So that may also have an impact.
Yeah, as you said, Shakhtar playing in the Conference League for the first time, but you're right to highlight different scales of the domestic season. Shakhtar currently leading the Ukrainian league, undefeated as well, 5 wins, 2 draws, joint best defence in the Ukrainian top flight as well, conceding just 4, and only Dynamo Kiev have scored more goals in the league campaign so far. But being in the Conference League, how do you think Shakhtar are viewing this competition? A chance for silverware or a distraction from the league?
No, I think it's certainly a chance for silverware because in recent seasons they've obviously been in the Champions League. And I think we've seen, especially last season and the season before that, they got a few all right results, but the other sides in there, the big ones anyway, are a level above in terms of quality.
Mm.
And it would have been nice for them to be in the Europa League, but then they got knocked out by Panathinaikos in the qualifying. And as a result of that, they've kind of got a big chance to at least go far in this competition and at a minimum get some positive coefficient points for Ukraine because it's been a hard few years, and as a result of that, Ukraine losing its automatic Champions league phase spot and all that kind of thing. Maybe Ukrainian sides are at a level now that the Conference League is their thing. We probably should be getting used to it. But on the flip side, there's hope that there'll be positive results and performances to come.
Well, was it then a disappointment to drop into the Conference League? As you said, they lost to Panathinaikos on penalties, and actually looking at the last round against Servette, very lucky to get through, obviously going to extra time.
Probably. I think initially when they didn't get past Panathinaikos, especially after the previous round where they absolutely battered Besiktas,
Yeah.
who in hindsight now were just awful under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. But I think I think now it's just accepting the reality of the situation and going from there, especially with the fact that Shakhtar have lost 2 key players right at the very end of the transfer window and now have to live without that, and have got a number of new young Brazilians that hopefully will get a chance to show what they're made of in this new tournament that the club's playing in.
Yeah, well, you speak about the new Brazilians. One of that is Luca Mireles, who they signed from Santos for 12 million euros. 2 goals in 4 games at just the age of 18. You've also got Pedrinho, who I think is actually the third oldest or fourth oldest player in the squad at just 27. They actually only have one player who's 30 or older currently in the squad. So a very young flair squad. Pedrinho scored 5 goals. Kua Elias also got 5 goals. Where does this Brazilian flair and connection fit with Shakhtar?
Well, when the full-scale invasion began in 2022, all the foreign players in Shakhtar's side left. They were given the free ability to go on loan places, run down their contracts, and leave. And as a result of that, for that first season, 22-23, Shakhtar was more or less exclusively Ukrainian. I think they had one Brazilian who was already sort of playing in and around Ukraine anyway. And then since then, they've been slowly bringing back Brazilian talents into their squad. And I'd say right now, it's kind of on par with what everyone knows and kind of loves about Shakhtar from that 2000s and 2010s period when they were tearing it up in, different European competitions. So now it's a kind of different, I guess, strategy because they're a lot younger. There's a lot more of them at a younger age. So there's not others that can maybe, take them on under their wing and help them out and that kind of thing. It's now very much you're thrown into the deep end and let's see if you sink or swim. And if you do swim, then you could be rewarded with a move to the Premier League, for example, like Kevin, who did that very thing a year and a half ago when he came to Shakhtar and then moved to Fulham on deadline day. And he's been brilliant as well. One of probably a key player and a key talent. And he wasn't a starter initially, and then he just really came into his own. And you can see the kind of things that he's doing for Fulham in the kind of little highlight packages that they're showing already. And hopefully that will be a good motivation for the new talents that have just come in, like you mentioned, Luka Morelos, there's a guy called Isake, Allison, who did really well at the start of the season, especially in that game against Besiktas, those two games against Besiktas I was mentioning, sadly is now injured. And actually that's, you could say maybe that's a positive for Aberdeen that he's out for a number of months because he was probably slightly more senior. If 2021 is more senior compared to 18, 19-year-olds. But he really had a great start to the season, but unfortunately he's now out for a bit. But yeah, in general, Shakhtar under Arda Turan, I'm sure we'll come on to, look to be returning to what we know as let's say, a traditional Shakhtar side.
Yeah, and you mentioned Allison there, and I was definitely pleased, in inverted commas, to see that he was injured because, as you say, his start to the season, the stats looked very encouraging. How does the Brazilian flair combine with, let's call it the Ukrainian grit, because it is, as you say, a team mixed with both Brazilian and Ukrainians?
Yeah, so we've kind of returned to this traditional thing where you've got a Ukrainian defense, Ukrainian goalkeeper, maybe a Ukrainian midfielder in the likes of an Artem Bondarenko, an Ocheretsko, who are either holding or a bit more central. And then the Brazilians, either at fullback / going forward, are the kind of main, let's say, armory for Shakhtar to try and score goals, create things, and do that. And it's actually a good thing that I think over the last few league games and cup games that those young Brazilians have actually been bedded in and actually have started scoring. So they've actually got a bit of run of form going into this European competition.
Yeah, and you mentioned there Arda Turan's come in May, 2-year deal. What has he brought to Shakhtar that they were maybe missing previously? It certainly looks like a resolute defense, but a bit of passion. We saw what he certainly was like as a player. Is that influenced in their squad now?
100%. Just literally on this past weekend, Shakhtar posted this very, let's say, fiery team talk that he gave after their victory. And yeah, he's proper into it, and he's loving what he's seeing from his players. Obviously, it was a positive result. They won 4-0 against one of the bottom sides, Rook. And he is someone that has brought in a lot of intensity to Shakhtar's play. So during pre-season, he got them training 3 times. And some of the players weren't, playing particularly well. But in those early pre-season matches, but since they've adapted to it,
Mhm.
they seem to be probably the fittest Ukrainian side, the freshest, and can do the extra miles in the closing stages of games when they're needed.
Yeah, and that is certainly a concern potentially for Thursday night, is that fitness, that youthfulness that Shakhtar possess. Where do you think that they will look to hurt Aberdeen most, or maybe how does their style of play exploit Aberdeen?
Well, wing play is, I think, pretty integral. Pedrinho, as we mentioned, scored a fair few goals. He's quite flary, nice passing. I think he's having to take on a bit of more of an integral, influential role now that Kevin is gone. You've got the likes of Luka Moraes, who seems to be a more consistent centre forward than maybe some of Shakhtar's other options, like Cowan Ellis that we mentioned, who is a bit bigger and taller, but seems to be a lot more inconsistent in front of goal, from what I've seen. But I wouldn't put it past Turan to maybe start Elias on Thursday because he's a bit more physical, as mentioned. And then it's basically build up through the middle as well. Oleg Ocheretko, who's sort of really come into his own this season after having a really good loan spell last campaign at Karpaty Lviv. He is now someone that, takes the ball on, breaks up a bit of play, and then tries and transitions it to those forwards that then hopefully end up doing something. I would be surprised if there were going to be a lot of crosses or that kind of thing. I think they'll be trying to play it in a bit more on the floor and maybe try and create something in and around the box.
And in terms from an Aberdeen point of view, obviously you've alluded to in terms of compared to Shakhtar, we're at the total opposite end of the league, and confidence is certainly low. Beware the wounded animal. Is that something that Shakhtar potentially have to be worried about for this game?
Yeah, hopefully they don't take anything for granted, because as we've seen, they struggled against Servette. They haven't had the best of performances against Panathinaikos and struggled to score in those matches. So against, a team, as we mentioned, I think Aberdeen will probably be going quite defensive to try and counter some of that pace and flair that Shakhtar have. That Shakhtar don't get into maybe some of the habits that they do in the Ukrainian Premier League, because a lot of the time they are also facing against 10 men and, a lot of behind the ball opposition who then have to end up playing on the counter. And then, sometimes maybe it's a bit difficult to try and play in between those lines. So we'll have to wait and see. But I think it'll be a really interesting time.
It maybe feels a little bit amongst the Aberdeen support that Shakhtar are going to come here and blow us away. Do you share the maybe concerns of that, or do you think it'll be a closer contest?
I mean, I'm hoping that they would come and blow Aberdeen away in the sense that they need to. I think there needs to be some sort of statement start to this campaign to prove that, yes, this is the competition that we are in to win. We're one of the top, 5-6 favourites from the bookies. Yes, we can do it. But I think it's probably going to be a bit narrower, in all honesty. I think, a bit of that physicality, some of those Brazilians aren't going to like some of those challenges. And then we're just going to sort of have to maybe ride out that wave and see how Shakhtar end up doing, after about half an hour or so. And even if, for example, because Shakhtar isn't the most, let's say, physically domineering side in terms of height or anything like that, maybe set pieces might be a problem.
Well, and that was where I was going to come on to, in terms of that opening exchanges. I'm sure Podri is not quite sold out, but certainly heading for a sellout. I'm not sure how many Ukrainians will be in attendance, but the atmosphere, I'm sure, Podri under the lights, as always on a European night, is a great occasion. It's probably a tighter pitch than I'm sure some of the Shakhtar players will be used to. Set pieces, as long as we can beat the first man, hopefully we can exploit. But where else could Aberdeen look to potentially hurt Shakhtar on Thursday night?
Well, I think the two centre backs that Shakhtar have got, Bondar and Matvienko, whilst they are relatively consistent, they have got prone to mistakes. They've not been too reliable in European competition over the past couple of years, especially when they're playing maybe against someone who's a bit more physical than them, because I think they're both around 6 foot-ish, 6'1", and if they're going to be coming up against just a bit more oomph than they usually are, then that might be something that Aberdeen might be able to exploit. Maybe balls in behind, try and force them into making mistakes when passing out the back, that kind of thing.
Do you think then, given, as you've said, they might not be used to a little bit of physicality, do you think Arda Turan and that Shakhtar side will come and try and score early, quieten the crowd down, take that out of the game, or how do you see them approaching the game?
I would think so. Albeit, I don't think that Shakhtar have scored too many early goals that often this season under him. Albeit, as I mentioned, with that intensity that he's tried to instill into the team, with that sort of high press energy, hopefully we can see some of that in action against Aberdeen. Maybe that might then come to fruition, and hopefully they can then, push on and maybe get a few goals if that is on offer.
Yeah, and our style has tended to be, using the wingers, cutting inside, and trying to produce goals from balls into the box. That sense, trying to play the ball quickly. If we get into that sort of style, would that almost suit Shakhtar being able to exploit spaces in behind our own fullbacks?
Yeah, for the counter, I think probably. But then again, like I said, crosses and that kind of thing, it might be a bit difficult for the Shakhtar defence to deal with that. Albeit, Dimitri Riznik in the net is actually very, very good. Good reflexes, good saves, and he was probably their standout player in the Champions League last campaign. And I think he's looking for a move to a top league at some stage soon. So he'll be on the lookout to try and prevent any problems like that. But I think that Shakhtar will try and calm it down, try and maybe ride that wave out if there is one, unless they're going to be starting it, and then try and get at least a couple goals to try and make it comfortable. But knowing Ukrainian teams, and especially when they come to the UK, be it England, be it Scotland, it does get difficult for whatever reason. So
maybe the travel.
We'll have to wait and see.
Well, I'll cling on to any hope of positivity that I can take, Andrew, at this point, and I certainly, will be hoping that it's the Dons that can get an early goal, because I do feel certainly where confidence is right now, an early goal for Shakhtar could affect the players, but also the crowd as well, a little bit as well, on what could be a long night. As I said, I couldn't believe when doing the research for the Shakhtar side that, as I said, you only got Marlon in that squad who is actually 30. Even Petriak hasn't been in the squad this season at 31. Everyone else is under 30 years old. And I said, you mentioned Matvienko at 29. He's played 15 times, and Nazarinya at 28 as well. But Ukrainian internationals in the team as well, isn't there?
Yeah, Matvienko, as I mentioned, he's the Ukraine national team captain. He's been a stalwart really for the past 5 years or so. Ocheretsko has just recently got his first cap in the last international break alongside Artem Bondarenko. So those two are sort of progressing slowly after, past few years of being promising youngsters. Now they really have to come into their own as more senior talents in this very young squad. And Riznik, he is regularly called up, but he is third choice to Anatoly Trubin, who plays at Benfica, and Andriy Lunin, who is at Real Madrid. But still, realistically, if neither of those two were there, I think he'd do a stellar job as a number one for Ukraine as well. Let's see how Shakhtar do, because, as we've mentioned, it's been a bit of a weird roller coaster in the qualifying campaign. Some really good performances, some less so. And now at least they've got into a bit of a run of form in the league. There is maybe potential that they can continue that going into Thursday.
Yeah, I almost was looking at the European form and potentially some of the away form not being as strong. I wonder if this game's almost coming a month too late for Aberdeen, given it's allowed Arda Turan and his squad a bit more familiarity, and I think it's 3 clean sheets in a row as well. So certainly Thursday will be a tough test and a real kind of statement. It feels, as we've said, maybe a bit of a free hit for Aberdeen as well in this competition, but a real marker of where we can go. Because if we can sneak a result, we'll certainly be the happier of the two sides. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, well, Andrew, thank you very much for taking the time as you wait for your flight out of Chisnau Airport to join us on Red Tinted Glasses. If anyone wants to tune in and get a bit of perspective on Ukrainian football, where can they find your content?
Zoril Donetsk is available on Twitter, Instagram. You can also find my new YouTube channel that's just dropped with my first video from last week, where Georgy Sudakov, the Ukrainian ex-Shakhtar star, now at Benfica, set myself and a friend a challenge to find a shirt from his first ever football club, where we had to travel to his hometown and do some interesting things there on YouTube at Glory Hunters. But Glory Hunters is spelt with an A instead of an ERS. So Glory Hunters, if you want to try and check that out, then please do.
Well, if you've been watching the video here on the YouTube channel, head over and check out Andrew's channel as well. Andrew, thank you very much for your time tonight as we recorded this episode. And thank you very much to all of you who have tuned in either via video here on YouTube or on audio platform. Until next time, thanks for tuning in.